The Stanford Prison Study, which is also known as the Zimbardo Experiment, took place in 1971 at Stanford University and was led by Professor Philip Zimbardo. Its aim was to investigate how the social environment of a prison affects the behavior of individuals. In 1971, Professor Philip Zimbardo conducted an influential study known as the Stanford Prison Study or Zimbardo Experiment. The study was carried out at Stanford University and aimed to explore the impact of the prison environment on participants' behavior. The researchers created a simulated prison environment in the basement of the Stanford University Psychological Institute building. From a large pool of applicants, 24 physically and psychologically healthy male volunteers were selected. The volunteers were randomly assigned to either the prison guard or prisoner group. The guards were given authority and control over the prisoners, who, in turn, lost their freedom and had to abide by the prison rules. The entire prison setting and interactions among participants were recorded on video. The researchers collected data on the participants' behavior, emotional states, and reactions. Within a few days of commencing the experiment, both the guards and prisoners began to display signs of psychological distress. The guards became increasingly aggressive and violent, while the prisoners experienced heightened tension, anxiety, and feelings of helplessness. The experiment was abruptly terminated after just 6 days due to severe ethical violations. Professor Zimbardo recognized that the experiment had spiraled out of control, posing a significant risk to the mental and physical well-being of the participants. The experiment showcased the significant impact and sway of the social environment on human behavior. Participants assigned as prison guards displayed unprecedented levels of aggression and brutality, while the prisoners subdued their personalities, becoming passive and helpless. The study brought to light ethical concerns and sparked widespread discourse in both scientific and public spheres. Conducting a study with such emotionally and psychologically distressing conditions, lacking proper supervision and participant protection, received criticism. Moreover, the experiment prompted revisions in ethical standards for human research. Stricter guidelines were implemented concerning informed consent, supervision, and monitoring of research to ensure the safety and well-being of participants. The Stanford Prison Study unveiled the profound influence people have on each other and their inclination to conform to social roles, particularly in situations where power and control are involved. The study ignited a surge of interest in social psychology and the examination of behavior within the context of power, authority, and group dynamics. All in all, the Stanford Prison Study was a pivotal and contentious experiment that raised numerous ethical and psychological questions, shedding light on social dynamics and power within the realm of incarceration. Its impact on research policy and practice concerning human subjects has been substantial. Professor Philip Zimbardo, the founder of the experiment, held the position of prison guard and played an active role in creating an atmosphere of control and repression in the experimental prison. He observed what was going on and recorded data on the participants' behavior. In addition to assigning roles, participants were also physically and psychologically prepared for their roles. Prisoners were arrested by police, searched, and dressed in special uniforms. Wardens were given uniforms and equipment to create the illusion of authority and control. Over time, prison guards began to use physical and emotional violence against inmates. Prisoners suffered from psychological stress, humiliation, and helplessness. Some participants showed signs of mental illness and were forced to leave the experiment early. After 6 days, when the situation began to spiral out of control and the degree of brutality increased, Zimbardo decided to terminate the study early. He realized that the psychological and physical well-being of the participants was in serious jeopardy. The Stanford Prison Study faced criticism in the scientific community because of violations of ethical principles, including a lack of sufficient consent and protection for participants. The experiment has also raised questions about psychological effects and potential harm to participants. The Stanford Prison Study has left a lasting impact on the understanding of human behavior, social psychology, and research ethics. The experiment brought global attention to the brutality, dehumanization, and psychological violence that can unfold within closed institutional settings. By shedding light on the interplay between the social environment and human behavior, the study deepened our comprehension of the significance of roles, power dynamics, and contextual factors in shaping and modifying behavior. Furthermore, the experiment acted as a catalyst for further exploration into the influence of power and social roles on behavior, the dynamics of group interactions, and the mechanisms of conformity. Through open debates and discussions within the scientific community and society, the study contributed to the improvement of ethical standards in research involving human subjects. This led to the implementation of stricter requirements for informed consent and the protection of participants. The Stanford Prison Study has become a widely referenced example in the examination of ethical concerns and the psychological dimensions of power, authority, and social interactions. The U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, conducted a covert program known as Project MKUltra during the 1950s to 1970s. This classified initiative aimed to explore methods of manipulating minds and exerting control over individuals using various techniques, including psychoactive substances, hypnosis, electroshock, and other means. Project MKUltra consisted of numerous sub-projects, each focusing on specific aspects of mind manipulation and behavior. Some sub-projects delved into the effects of hallucinogenic substances like LSD on human consciousness and behavior, with the objective of assessing their potential use in operational activities, such as the development of reconnaissance drugs. One notorious aspect of MKUltra involved studying the effects of LSD on subjects without their knowledge or consent. The CIA recruited individuals, including volunteers, agency personnel, and individuals obtained through other organizations and institutions. These individuals were administered doses of LSD, often in high concentrations, while their reactions were closely observed. Unfortunately, many subjects suffered severe physical and psychological consequences as a result of these experiments. The public outcry surrounding MKUltra reached its peak in the 1970s, when the program's existence became known to the general public. In 1973, the program was halted following an investigation by the U.S. Congress, which revealed the unethical and illegal practices associated with it. To conceal the research findings, the CIA destroyed numerous documents pertaining to Project MKUltra. The disclosure of the MKUltra program had significant implications for the fields of psychology and research ethics, raising profound concerns about human rights violations and ethical breaches. While many records pertaining to the project were destroyed, some documents survived and were made accessible to the public. This allowed for further examination and exploration of the extent of the MKUltra program and its ethical ramifications. The revelation of information regarding Project MKUltra also sparked reforms in the regulation of research involving human subjects. In 1974, the U.S. Congress passed the National Research Act, establishing the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects in Biomedical and Behavioral Research. This commission developed fundamental ethical principles and guidelines, including the Belmont Report, which served as the foundation for regulating research involving human subjects in the UN. The MKUltra project stands as one of the most infamous and scandalous instances of power abuse and human rights violations in the realm of research. It underscored the critical importance of ethical review and oversight in such studies to prevent potential harm to participants. Moreover, the case highlighted the necessity of openness and transparency in scientific research, enabling the public to evaluate and discuss the ethical aspects and potential risks associated with research conducted on. The Tuskegee experiment commenced in 1932 in Macon County, Alabama, and persisted until 1972. Its objective was to observe the natural progression of syphilis in an uncontrolled group of men, including African Americans, without obtaining their informed consent. The experiment was conducted by the Public Health Service and the U.S. Public Health Service. During the experiment, only a portion of the participants were provided with treatment, while the remainder received no medical intervention. The purpose was to monitor the progression of syphilis over time. However, this violated fundamental principles of human research ethics, such as the requirement for informed consent from participants, and the responsibility to ensure the safety and well-being of research subjects. The scandal surrounding the Tuskegee experiment erupted in 1972 when media reports brought its existence to public attention. The revelation sparked intense public and human rights activists' outrage, as the researchers deliberately withheld treatment from the afflicted individuals, causing them pain and suffering. This incident resulted in a negative perception of human research and prompted revisions to ethical guidelines pertaining to medical experimentation. In response to the scandal and the exposure of the Tuskegee experiment, significant changes and reforms were implemented. In 1974, the U.S. Congress established the National Commission for the Protection of Biomedical and Behavioral Research Subjects. The National Human Subjects Biomedical and Behavioral Research Commission Act was enacted to establish comprehensive guidelines and ethical standards for human research conducted in the United States. This legislation mandated the necessity of obtaining informed consent from research participants and emphasized the responsibility to prioritize their safety and well-being. The Tuskegee experiment had far-reaching consequences and sparked significant transformations within the medical and scientific community. It serves as a poignant reminder of the crucial importance of upholding ethical standards and safeguarding the rights and welfare of individuals involved in research. Subsequent to the Tuskegee incident, strict monitoring and regulation of medical experiments were implemented to prevent any recurrence of such ethical violations. The Tuskegee experiment stands as one of the most impactful and unfavorable instances in the history of human research. Its exposure led to heightened awareness and a call for greater accountability in medical and scientific research, resulting in the implementation of more stringent ethical standards to protect the rights and well-being of research participants. In the Tuskegee experiment, researchers affiliated with the U.S. Public Health Service conducted a study on the natural course of syphilis among African American men in Macon County, Alabama. The following are key aspects of the study. Participant recruitment. Initially, the researchers actively recruited participants, particularly African Americans, from an uncontrolled group. Many individuals were unaware of the true nature and purpose of the study. Participants were informed that they would receive treatment for a condition referred to as bad blood, which was a common euphemism for syphilis at that time. Lack of informed consent. Participants were not provided with comprehensive information about the researchers' intentions and did not give their informed consent to participate. They were denied the right to be informed about their condition and receive appropriate treatment. Denial of treatment. The researchers deliberately withheld treatment for syphilis from the participants, disregarding the prevailing medical standard that advocated for the use of available treatments like penicillin. Duration of the experiment. The study spanned a duration of 40 years, from 1932 to 1972. Throughout this period, the researchers observed the progression of syphilis among the participants, without offering them adequate treatment or care. Ethical violations. The Tuskegee experiment was marked by significant ethical violations, including the absence of informed consent and the neglect of participant safety and well-being, which goes against fundamental principles of human research. Disclosure and consequences. In 1972, the details of the experiment were revealed by the press, leading to its public disclosure. This disclosure triggered widespread outrage and prompted a reassessment of ethical standards in medical research. The public revelation of the Tuskegee experiment in 1972 had far-reaching consequences, which are as follows. Outrage among the public. The disclosure of the experiment's details sparked widespread public outrage. Civil rights activists, medical professionals, and the general public expressed deep anger and indignation over the ethical violations committed during the study. International scandal. News of the Tuskegee experiment spread beyond the borders of the United States, leading to an international scandal. Numerous countries and organizations condemned the research and called for immediate changes to ethical standards in human research. Termination of the experiment. Following the widespread exposure, the Tuskegee experiment was promptly halted in 1972. Participants affected by syphilis were finally granted access to appropriate treatment. Establishment of the National Commission. In response to the scandal and ethical breaches, the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research was established. This commission was tasked with developing ethical principles and guidelines for human research, including the crucial aspects of informed consent and the protection of participants' well-being. Ethical rule revisions. The Tuskegee experiment prompted significant revisions to ethical rules governing human research. These changes encompassed more rigorous oversight and monitoring of research activities, along with the mandatory requirement of informed consent and the protection of participants' safety and well-being. The Tuskegee experiment stands as a somber illustration of ethical misconduct, underscoring the significance of ethical awareness and responsibility in human research. Following the public disclosure of the experiment, both the concerned public and the medical community took various measures to prevent the recurrence of similar ethical violations in the future. The Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp served as the setting for one of the most notorious and brutal experiments, known as the Twin Experiments. These experiments were conducted between 1943 and 1944 by Dr. Joseph Mengele, an SS officer and Nazi doctor. Driven by his fascination with the genetics and biology of twins, Mengele saw them as a unique avenue to study heredity, while disregarding the influence of environmental factors. Upon arrival at the camp, twins underwent a horrific selection process, with only a small fraction of them being chosen to survive for the sake of these experiments. The experiments encompassed various procedures, including 1. Psychological and physical tests were administered to the twins to examine their reactions to different stimuli. In order to study the development and treatment of diseases, the twins were deliberately exposed to infections and ailments such as tetanus, gangrene, and tuberculosis. Traumatic surgical procedures were performed without the use of anesthesia to investigate the effects of trauma and the body's responses. The possibility of altering the color of eyes, hair, and skin through chemical means was explored. Twins were subjected to injections of experimental drugs and poisons to scrutinize their effects on the human body. Numerous twins lost their lives or suffered severe injuries as a direct result of these experiments. Dr. Mengele had a reputation for selecting both children and adults as subjects, showing no mercy in inflicting torment and suffering upon them. In 1945, the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp was liberated by Soviet forces, and although Mengele managed to escape from the camp, the documentation of his crimes remained. Interest in Dr. Mengele's experiments on twins persisted even after his escape. Following the war, thorough investigations were conducted into his crimes, and the testimonies of the surviving twins played a crucial role as evidence against him. Interest in Dr. Mengele's experiments on twins persisted even after his escape. Following the war, thorough investigations were conducted into his crimes, and the testimonies of the surviving twins played a crucial role as evidence against him. Among the harrowing accounts that vividly illustrate the cruelty of Mengele's experiments is the story of twins Mischa and Vera Schorfer, who were selected as subjects for his research. As adults, they recount the infections deliberately inflicted upon them, the surgeries conducted without anesthesia, the physical and psychological torments they endured, and the deaths of numerous fellow twins. The twin experiments conducted at Auschwitz-Birkenau stand as one of the most egregious examples of inhumanity and violations of human rights in the realm of scientific research. These experiments were instrumental in spurring the development of international ethical principles and regulations aimed at safeguarding the rights and well-being of research participants. It is crucial to emphasize that conducting such experiments on human beings is utterly unacceptable and runs counter to the ethical principles and human rights standards that now govern scientific research. Rigorous protocols and permissions are now in place to ensure the safety, protection, and informed consent of participants in scientific studies.